So, good morning everyone and welcome to Coffee with Quha webinar about using grid tree with access methods. So I'm Jussi Kujanpää and with me here is Petri Latva-Rasku.
Hey everyone.
And we also have our special guest from Smartbox online. So Neil and Adam, can you please introduce yourselves?
I'm Adam. Not joking, I'm sorry. Adam from Smartbox. I'm head of assessment at Smartbox. I'm working mainly in the UK with specialist assessment services here.
And I'm Neil Fitzgerald and I work at Smartbox and I am the product manager for Smartbox. And I've worked in the AT team alongside Adam for over 10 years and I've learned so much off him. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. And at first, I want to mention that we will record this video and this webinar, and we try to publish a summary video afterwards in YouTube. But still, if you have any questions or comments during the webinar, please don't hesitate to interrupt us. And you can also send your questions using the chat window or by email to webinar@quha.com. Okay, so let's start.
Okay, so maybe I will just shoot a question directly to Adam first. So since our webinar is about grid 3, so what is grid 3?
Adam has just dropped off the call, so I'll hop into that question, no problem. So Grid 3 is Windows software produced by Smartbox, which basically provides an on-screen source for access to accessible apps, to communication, to environmental control, to computer control, and also to a whole vast array of other grid sets for things like stories, interactive learning, and also just having fun. So there's a lot happening within Grid 3. There he is. No, he's not. He's trying to join back in.
Okay.
And so Grid 3's been out for quite a few years now, and over the course of those years, we've done many updates. There's normally a monthly update and a kind of major quarterly update to the software. And we cater for all different access methods. And Adam, I was just very quickly covering for you there on what is Grid 3.
Thanks.
And just going through the core elements. All right.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. Sorry about that. Technically.
No worries. Is there anything you wanted to add, Adam? I just explained how Grid 3's been out for a number of years. We've had many updates and the different kind of areas of Grid we which support.
Yeah, 7 areas of Grid. So just think, whether you're working with communication users, people who need to support their communication, or access, so physical access, with a range of different access methods, including Quha and other head mouse pointers. So the access that we're going to look at later is built into the software, into Grid 3 to support those different access methods. So we've got users who are perhaps young children who are just beginning their journey in needing to support their physical access to their schoolwork or their leisure use, later on older users with work, but also all the way through if there is a need for AAC, for communication aid support, supporting verbal communication, then the Grid is supporting that too.
All right. I'm just thinking that would this be a good time to show a short demonstration of Grid 3 or? Yeah,
absolutely. And apologies for dropping on and off. Hopefully that won't happen again, but I should be okay now. So perhaps if I share my screen and I'll do a quick demonstration for those that haven't seen Grid 3 before of what you can expect and the sort of how it looks. So I'm just going to quickly share my screen. Okay, are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah,
Great, brilliant. Okay, so I use Grid 3 a lot, and so when I open my Grid 3 application, I'm offered a number of what we call users, and these are different starting points. You can see there I've got different names for different users, and this might be for an assessment device in in an assessment center or in a school, for example, where different users are set up for different students or individuals who need different access settings or different content on their screen. So I'm just going to open, I'm going to create, in fact, a new user, and then we can just have a quick tour just to see what's there. So just get started and do this really quickly. We'll just call this Quha for today. I'll choose a language. Today I'm going to work in English, United Kingdom. I'm not going to attempt to work in Finnish. Apologies, guys. And I've chosen a voice, but there are a range of different voices I could choose. I'll skip the next step for speed, but this is the point. This is those 7 areas I was talking about where we present different content according to the needs of the user. And we might be supporting non-literate users or literate users, so symbol and text communication. But then we might also be working with someone who's just beginning to have fun with their device, learn to use their access method for the first time. And that would apply to interactive learning. So we present some activities, games that can be used to practice access or begin to use some early communication skills. And then accessible apps are those things that we try and make a bit easier to control. So we might take something like Facebook or Spotify or YouTube and simplify it, simplify the access method so that icons on the screen are larger and less complex, but whilst and so making that desirable application more accessible to that user. Computer control is where one of our customers, one of our users, as well as perhaps using Grid for communication, might also actually want to be able to control other applications on their computer, whether that be a browser.
Well, some useful advanced features too, and some ways going to demo.
Yeah, so some advanced features. You might be wanting to access a word processor or a spreadsheet or PowerPoint or graphic design, whatever it happens to be. And then finally, there, depending on your hardware, depending on what device you're running Grid 3 on, you might also want to be able to control your world, control the area around you. So that could be things in your house or at work, so televisions, doors, window openers, that sort of thing, phones. Let's have a look and see what it looks like. So the first time you open a user, you're presented with a screen that looks like this. This is Grid Explorer, and what you see will depend upon what selections you made with regard to content. So in the first couple of lines there, I've got some symbol communication resources, and on the bottom line are my text communication resources. Now I can swipe right and we'll see some more resources there. There's some more symbol resources. There are some folders full of some of the interactive learning activities I talked about, and on the bottom there you'll see a folder of accessible apps, environmental control and computer control. So those are some of the standard resources. If I just jump into 1 or 2 examples, so we might be thinking about robust communication. So if I was to bring up a screen like this, this would be an example of a communication resource that's supported by symbols. So quite a busy screen, lots on it. We can have different types of symbols on the screen or photographs, but I can begin to create phrases and sentences using the cells on the screen. And maybe what I'll just quickly do is also just share I'll just reshare my screen with sound, so bear with me for a moment. If I could find the setting. Lost it. There we go. And I failed. Let's not worry about it for now. I want to go to, and then I might jump off to another page and say where I want to go to. I want to go to school. Okay, and then I can speak it as so. So that'll be an example of symbol communication. Equally, if I come out of that grid set, we might want to simplify that somewhat. So this is a fairly recent piece of content we have launched. This is something with less on the page, but offers a more scaffolded approach to communication. So I think my point here is you can have something that's quite complex and it's based upon the words we all use every day, or we can use something that is a little more phrase-based and leads you through the communication options you might need. So this might be for a different type of user, perhaps somebody who needs a bit more functional support with their communication. So now I have a whole phrase to say I want to do something. And off I go. And it's taking me through and leading me through to some of the options I might want to. I want to do gardening. Okay. And at the same time, I might want to do some simple app control. So I might still want to be able to control my Amazon Alexa or my environmental control. I might have a look at my photos so I can begin to have some simple control of my television at home, for example. Now, other users that we support might be text communication users. So a typical text communication might use a resource like Fast Talker, where we present a QWERTY keyboard, for example, with prediction.
Hello, my name is.
Okay, and I'm hopefully not going to make too many selections to work efficiently to produce my text. If I wanted to, I can then go off and I could use my web browser. So these are some of the accessible apps we talk about where we might present something in a safer way. So for example, in YouTube, and I won't go into a YouTube video, but on the left-hand side, we'll see YouTube coming up. But on the right-hand side are my nice, large, consistently sized buttons that allow me to control what's on the screen and make selections. And the nice thing about that when you're using something like a head pointer or some other access method is that you've got this, you haven't got a tiny icon to hit, you've got something that you can control with the grid in terms of perhaps a magnified cell or a cell where you have to look at a cell for a whole second, but you've got space in which, if you can't keep your head absolutely still with a head mouse, you've got space to allow that cursor to drift around a little while still maintaining your position on your target cell. Okay, if I just was to say, same approach, we will provide a very consistent, just maximize that so we hide that. We provide a very consistent layout then, and that's really important for our users, that every page, whether you're looking at YouTube or a web browser or your communication pages, is presented in quite a consistent way so that things have become easy to find. Just imagine if someone came to your work computer and started moving icons around on the desktop or icons around in your files and folders, and you'd scratch your head and spend a little time re-familiarizing yourself where everything was. So whatever we do, we think we're quite carefully when we're designing content that things are consistent. But of course, one of the key things about Grid is it's an authoring piece of software. So if it's really important that a user needs to move things perhaps onto the left-hand side because they have stronger access on the left-hand side, then I can come into an editing mode and I can, for example, pick up my scroll buttons and just move them. So you can add extra content if you want to, and you can move things around if you want to. So if that's a more appropriate layout for somebody, then we can do that. Okay, and so everything is customizable and changeable, and you can adapt and personalize as you go through.
All right.
That's a flavor of what we're looking at there. If I stop sharing for a moment.
Okay, hey, that looks really accessible and easy. And I noticed that you are using Windows. So is the Grid 3 compatible with which operating systems? Of course, people are probably now interested in Windows 11 because it is a brand new operating system version.
Yeah, Neil, do you want to pick that one up? You're muted, Neil.
I am indeed. Thank you for that. Yes. So yeah, Windows 11 is starting to come out. We are doing some preliminary tests with Windows 11. Things are looking good. It's one of those tricks whenever Microsoft releases a new operating system. It's always a very, very high chance that whatever works with the previous generation will work with the next generation. And we've seen that with Grid. We haven't officially announced Windows 11 compatibility and support. That's mainly because we haven't written all the knowledge base articles that we need to provide the support to our customers. But we are working on that, and we are hopefully working towards releasing something soon to announce Windows 11 compatibility. But for now, it's Windows 10 and all the way back to Windows 7. So we don't like to talk about Windows 8 very much in the tech industry.
I don't think there are many users for that version.
So yeah, it's really exciting times, and we're really loving kind of what's happening around Windows 11 with the side porting of Android apps and bringing multiple platforms together on one, which we think is going to be fantastic for a lot of our users. So yeah, watch this space on Grid 3 and Windows 11.
Yeah, and Grid 3 works also on iPads really nicely, I think.
Yeah, so we have the iOS app, Grid for iOS, and they are two different pieces of software on two different platforms, and they also have two different feature sets. So as Adam described, the 7 core areas within Grid. On iOS, we have text communication, symbol communication, environmental controls. We have a couple of accessible apps on that platform, but the main emphasis around the iOS app is communication, essentially. For those who do require environmental control, then Grid 3 would be the recommended platform for that individual. It's not supported on iOS.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So Neil, could you please also explain what are the different access methods that are available for Grid 3, for example, for Windows and also for iPad?
No problem. Let me just share my screen. If I can work out how to find the settings. There we go.
Experiencing some small problems.
Yeah, it's okay. I think Teams did an update this morning, so I'll just share my screen now.
I'm glad it's not just me, Neil.
We also had to reboot our computer 5 minutes before the webinar. Our network stopped.
So if I go into the settings within Grid and we go to the access session. So here we go. We've got 5 core access methods that we support. Pointer, which obviously what we're talking about with the Zono 2. So we have, within each access method, we have different activation methods. And that's really key to point out, first of all. So on Pointer, not only can you use Zono 2's built-in clicking system, as well as any of your accessories with Puffo or anything else like that to generate the clicks. Or you can do a hold to activate, or you can do a dwell to activate on a cell, and you can also do a switch to activate a cell. Majority of people tend to use a dwell, just so the fact that you don't have an extra accessory plugged in, or if you don't quite have it, or anything like that, then dwell is the most popular. And in and around dwell, we have various different highlighting options and different visual and auditory feedback options. And then we also have a separate section for how you may want to control your desktop environment. And that is pretty much replicated throughout the rest of the access methods. Probably the most similar is eye gaze. The only difference being you'll find is that there is calibration options in there, but the highlighting and the activation methods of dwell and pressing a switch are the same, and the extra one you get with eye gaze is blinking. Moving on to touch, settings are a lot more reduced than the first two. So we have options for accepting the first item touched, last item touched, and also a touch and hold with various filters for filtering out accidental presses. And then we have switches, and switches are by far probably the most complicated access method, mainly due to the amount of options available around switch scanning. So we support all available options in terms of row column, column row, simple scan, and then we also have very advanced settings like being able to swap your head switches around so that you're averaging out the strain across both sides rather than just on the one side, constantly activating one switch. And there are also commands in there such as long holding the switch.
Okay.
I just stop there because I'm probably about to answer your next question if I carry on.
Yeah, so if I want to use Quha Zono 2 mouse with grid 3, so it is the pointer access, right?
Mm-hmm. That's correct. That's correct.
And then if I want to have grid 3 and Quha Zono 2, so Smartbox is now, you have those two available for sales. So yeah.
Absolutely.
So you are the one, or Smartbox is the one to be contacted, for example.
Yeah, and our support team are also fully trained up on Zono 2 and also your Dwell application as well. So our support team can help with the handover between the two applications and set up individuals to enable them to swap in between access methods, which is very key.
Okay. Neil, you mentioned earlier this dual access. So what is dual access and how to set up and support?
Yeah, so dual access has been something that's been requested to Smartbox for years now, and we have various ways of doing it. And the reason why the requests have been increasing is because a lot of people are having multiple access methods. This could be down to fatigue, it could be down to practicality of environment, it could be down to environmental reasons, or even just down to reasons around positioning. And it's very important to allow everybody to swap between a different access method that is more suitable for this point in time. So typically speaking, it can be quite tricky to do, but within Grid, we've simplified it with a couple of commands. And if I just load up my Grid again and show you these. Go. So we're back into SuperCore. Here's one I prepared earlier, as we say. And if we go into Magic Wand and go into Settings, just minimize that window there. You can see on the right-hand side of the screen, we have rest pointer and we also have rest switches. And the way we would advise this to be set up is if somebody's using a scanning method of access, such as switches, then we can define on the switches that we can have a long hold, which gives us an extra function for a single switch. So typically speaking, when you have a single switch, it's normally set to scanning and both activate. And within Grid, we can choose to say, well, if you hold the switch longer than what you need to in order to activate, we can actually use that as a separate switch. And we have that configured as a hold. So when I hold down my switch for 2 seconds, it will actually pause or resume my switch access. So if my access method is switches, that is my secondary access method, so the one that I'll be using when I'm more fatigued or I'm in bed or anything else changes along those lines, then I could press and hold down on my switch for a couple of seconds and it will engage the switch access. As we're talking about scanning access methods such as switches, it's important to also know about direct access methods such as pointers, such as the Zono 2. And that makes it far easier to rest your pointer input, as you can also turn on your switches and then just move your pointer over and then select pointer. And now your pointer input won't be recognized. Your switch will then work and you can then navigate using your new access method. If you wanted to revert back, all you have to do is go back to your settings page. And as Adam says, as Adam said earlier, you can configure the buttons within Grid to be in whatever position is most easiest for you. So if you are finding that you're switching access methods quite regularly, it makes more sense for your switch rest to be closer towards the top. When you are switching access methods and around pointer, the only button that remains available after being rested is actually the rest button. So you can just select that and then you can resume your pointer input. So access setting up access methods is relatively easy within Grid, and we have multiple commands to support that. We also understand that for some people, the amount of screen real estate that's available for vocabulary can be very limited. And so we've put also a couple of commands in the background. One of those is only show available when you have a certain access method selected and enabled. So if somebody didn't have the switches, all those switches options would automatically be hidden. So you can actually set it so that if they're not enabled, you won't see them. If they are enabled, you can see them, and you can also specify whether you want them on or off to begin with.
Okay. And can I have, for example, eye gaze and pointer and switch between those two?
Yes, absolutely. Any of those access methods that I listed, you can have a separate defined rest cell specifically for that access method. So you can turn on or off individual access methods, no problem. It is a lot easier if you're using direct access, such as Zono or eye gaze, just because, as I mentioned, the button that turns it on or off always remains active when using direct input. Yeah, so it gives great flexibility for selecting between access methods. And yeah, you can also use the two side by side, which is really a lovely way of doing it. So if you are using pointer input as your main method of access, but you want to utilize some switches for other reasons. So for example, I might be in my environmental control pages. I can press and hold my switch and it will automatically take me to my quick communication page, so that I don't have to go through 3 or 4 layers of navigation in order to get there. So they can be used as a navigational tool as well. So multiple access methods within Grid is really neat.
Okay.
And I think, Neil, you answered my question or point there, which was the key command then for dual access is rest. So if you, as I did earlier, if you go into edit mode and select a cell and then look for the rest command, that's your starting point. And when you choose the rest command, you have the secondary option of choosing, well, what is it I want to rest? Is it a pointer? Is it eye gaze? And then you can set them up as toggle buttons. So rest is the key. The rest cell is the key one to look for.
Absolutely. And just to expand on that a little bit, if somebody would like to have separate buttons for both on and off, that can be done, or it can be done on a single button with a toggle command where the input method can be toggled on or off. So yeah, it could be completely customized to the layout for the individual.
So you can create a single button to toggle between eye gaze and pointer, for example.
Yes, absolutely. We can go a lot further than that, where we can add multiple commands after that. So we may want to jump to a different grid set that's more attuned to that access method. So if you wanted to go to a more pointer and direct friendly grid set from a switch scanning friendly grid set, you can do all of that off the rest button. So which is great. It means that it can save the individual a couple of navigation jumps. Obviously saves them time, which enables them to communicate a lot faster.
Okay, thank you. So maybe we could also go to the demonstration. I think Adam, if I understood correctly, you have some demonstration how to set up grid 3 with Quha Zono, for example.
Yeah, sure. That's fine. Thank you. I'll give it a go. So I will share my screen in a moment, but before I do, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, the box, whilst slightly less messy than mine, looks like that. Okay, so it's Quha Zono 2, and inside the box are lots of useful goodies. So as well as your
Adam, sorry, Adam, got to stop you there. Your video isn't on.
If it is on.
Oh, is it? It's not coming up on mine.
What I will, and I've been spotlighted. Thank you very much, guys. That's useful. I didn't do that. I had that the other day, Neil. Teams is playing silly things with us. So to continue, what you'll also find then is the two key components, which is your actual head mouse, the Zono, and then your USB dongle, which you need to plug into the device that you want to use. So if I just unplug mine for a moment, which is currently in my USB port, there's the dongle. One thing to note on it, a standard dongle, is it does have a switch port as well, and that's really useful if you want to use a switch to make your selections. That's the easiest way to manage your switch to select, but we'll look at that in a moment. So this would plug into your...
Excuse me, we can't see Adam's video. I'm getting messages in the chat. We can't see you.
Oh.
It's interesting because we do see it with Jussi.
Yeah.
I'll try switching it on and off, but any better?
Yep, there we go.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Sorry about that.
Okay now.
Our video was on, but switching it on, switching it off, it's the usual way for tech support, isn't it? So there we go. Okay, so I was just showing you this, which is the USB dongle which plugs into your computer, and the point to note is that on the side of it there's a little switch port, and that's the bit that's useful if you want to use a switch to make your selection. It's certainly the easiest way to manage switch to make an activation. And the other end of this is your actual Quha Zono. So that's what it looks like. It has a button on it to turn it on. It has a mini USB for charging and for accessories. And you guys will be able to correct me, but I believe on this, one of the key things about the Quha Zono 2 is being the extended battery life. So we're now seeing a battery life of around 60 hours or something like that, I think.
Yeah.
Might be able to just fill people on the charge time, because I can't remember how long it takes to charge from flat. But the nice thing is you can plug it into your PC to charge if you need to. Okay.
4 hours for full charge.
4 hours. Thank you, guys. Well, you're the right people to say that. So, and then in the box are some really nice user-friendly instructions that are really easy to set up, and some adaptation. Firstly, a charging cable, but also some adapters to allow you to split the input on either your Zono or on your Zono or on your on your Zono or on your USB dongle, so that you can plug in more than one switch to do more than one thing. And what those switches do is configurable. So by default, it'll be a left click, but you can, for example, set up a switch to be a pause or a recenter my head mouse, or a scroll, or a right click, or a double click, for example. And that's all managed by software. Now, one of the things I really like about the Zono is actually it's plug and play pretty much. And the only time you really need the software is initially when you're setting it up. So perhaps in assessment, it's really useful. You could do the assessment on perhaps one device or one laptop. And I'll show you the software now briefly, and then we'll look at the grid 3, where we're going to actually do some demonstration of how you set it up in grid 3. But if I just quickly share my screen. Okay, so on the desktop, you will see a couple of Quha Zono icons, and I'm interested at the moment in the, well, firstly, the initialization is quite useful to look at briefly. And it will ask you there, or if I actually plug in my USB controller again, give me a moment. There we go. So the first thing is, usually one would wear the Zono on the right-hand side of the head, but of course you don't have to. But you just need to tell your Zono that you're going to wear it somewhere different. So you can choose to use it in the hand with a strap, on the foot. I've seen it used well. But if there's a reason to use the Quha Zono on the left-hand side of the head, for example, then you just you would set that up here. So I'm going to leave it using it on the right hand side. I should say as well, one other key thing, and the guys can add more to this. Neil mentioned this. In the box would come, and I'll just stop sharing for a moment to show you this. Oh, am I there? Have I disappeared? What?
Yeah.
We can hear your voice, but we cannot see any picture.
Hang on. Almost like the application has disappeared. Very odd. There we go. Let's just bring my camera back. Sorry, it disappeared for me for a moment. I think it's because it's mixed up between using a web browser and using the Teams application. So I was just going to say, in the box comes like a sports band, and the idea of this is that it's worn like that, and then the Quha Zono would sit over the ear on the right-hand side by default. Now, it's worth saying there are some accessories that you can get, and I really quite like the alternative headband, which is the one that sits more like that. I personally find it a bit more comfortable. But it's not.
Way, Adam,
excuse me. Can't see you. We can't see you.
Is that better?
No, we can see.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. I don't know why it keeps doing that. It says it's on at my end, and I'm showing my video. But okay, just to say, this is the standard headband. It's like a sports band that you wear here at the back. I quite like the optional accessory headband, which sits over the head. I find it a bit more stable and a bit more comfortable, and it has a little pocket then for the Quha Zono there. But typically, you'd set this up. There's a little clip in the box, and I'm just going to put this on. And you put it with the USB port, the little mini USB port facing backwards, is the easy way to put it on. And then also there is a little on-off switch, which I'll press in a moment. Before I do anything else, I'm just going to reshare my screen and hope nothing else goes wrong. Okay, hopefully you can still see my screen. Do shout if for any reason you can't. So we looked at the option that tells you where you're going to position your Zono. And then this is the bit that you only need during the assessment phase, because you only need to, once it's set up, it's learnt to the USB dongle, and you can take that USB dongle away from that device, plug it into any other device, and it'll use those same settings. You don't need to install software on every machine that you're going to use the Quha on, and I like that about it. So most importantly, some speed settings, which make it really, really flexible. So you can change the horizontal and vertical axis speeds. You can also use the tremor filter, and probably the easiest way to describe the tremor filter, please shout at me if you think I'm describing it wrong, but I see that as smoothing. So I increase that if I want a smoother experience, a less raw experience, if you like. So over some other head mice, this is some key advantages here, that you can really make this really quite sensitive, so you can use it with very little head movement if you need to.
Absolutely, Adam. I'll just to kind of expand on that as well. When comparing Zono 2 to something like the Headmouse Nano, those settings really come into their own with the tremor filtering and also the speed adjustment.
Yeah, I think
you would normally have to go into Windows and use the mouse cursor speed variant for mouse cursor speed adjustment, which isn't particularly very accessible, and it's not particularly easy.
Well, you're right, Neil. I think one of whilst the Nano's a lovely head mouse and it's plug and play and so on, it's limited by that. There isn't that level of flexibility that you've got here in terms of mouse control, controlling the speed of the mouse. So the other thing here is what I touched on this earlier, mouse actions. So if you had a switch plugged into your USB receiver, you can configure that accordingly. Oops. And choose from pause cursor, center cursor, double click, scroll, auto clicks on and off. And if you wanted then the right click, then you would use the splitter, which is provided for you. And then secondly, the Zono switch configuration. I mentioned that there's a little mini USB port. You can use that with the adapter that's provided to again configure different switches, or for example something like the Cento, which is the puff switch, the breath switch. Okay. The other thing here that's coming with Quha Zono 2 are gestures, and that's a key difference between this and the first generation Zono. So these are gestures that you can do with your head, for example, to control things like, or turn on, say, pause or scroll. And guys, I think you will have demonstrated those in a previous webinar. But fundamentally, if I was to just turn those on for a moment and then come back to I'll stop sharing and come back to my video. Again, please shout if people can't see my video screen.
Yeah, we can't.
You can't, okay. Let's just turn it back on. Is that better?
Yes.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay. So if I was to turn my Quha on, I'd get a little green light and then it'll blink occasionally, just like that, just show me it's charging. And also will go red when I turn it off. Okay, that's off now, and that's on, and that's it. Now I can start using this now, and I will need to share my screen again in a moment so you can see what's going on. But I'm just checking that I can use this now. Before I share in fact, I will start sharing my screen now so you can see this. And typically, I should say, before I share my screen, actually, one of the gestures you might do, if I just pick one, a pause, if I wanted to pause my mouse control, then I would typically just keep my head mouse still in the center somewhere for a second or so, and then do the prescribed gesture. And in the case of pause, it's right, left, right, left. So I just do right, left, and I'm moving my head now and the cursor is paused. So that'd be an example of one of the gestures that you can use. Now I have to say that most of our users in Grid 3 would usually, not always, it depends on preference, they might well make use of the rest cells because that's always in the same place. It could be quicker than doing that or learning the gestures if that's not appropriate. And so I quite like, again, the fact that the gestures is an option. You can turn them on and off. It's not for everyone, but they are there. And a particularly useful one I quite like is the scrolling option, which is similar again, but of course, because it's scrolling, instead of being left, right, it's up, down to get that scrolling. And then on a web browser or on a PDF, for example, you just tilt your head up or down to get that scrolling action. And that's really, really powerful. And will work in Grid 3 or work in computer control or work outside of the grid, of course, as well. Now to exit any gesture, so I'm currently paused, I keep my head still and I just move right then left. So I'm just going to stop for a moment and go right, left, left. I'll stay a bit stiller first. There we are, and we're off. Okay. Now I'm just going to turn my gestures off so that I don't accidentally begin a gesture. I should say that those gestures are significant enough that I think they're designed so you shouldn't get accidental gestures being turned on, but typically it would happen to me in the middle of a presentation, so I'm going to turn them off. Okay.
I think that this is a good idea, because we were also pondering whether to make them on or off by default, and I think that with the current versions, I think it is off.
It is off. Yeah.
And I agree with that.
Accidental activation.
I think that's right, and let people find those gestures and play with them, and learn some familiarization and work out for themselves whether it's for them or not. So I think you've made the right call. I think one other really important thing to say here, and this is typical of other head mice as well, but just to say, typically with a head mouse, you often would need to either recenter, and we've talked about there's a gesture for recenter, or you need some help to reach across the screen. So you've got a large screen and you just might have found yourself in you may have slumped in your wheelchair, for example, you just need some bit of help to get to the top of the screen. So this head mouse uses what we call, or I would call, relative positioning, which means I can use the edges of the screen to reposition my cursor. So at the moment I'm sitting in a natural position, and yet my head mouse has begun to, my cursor has begun to find itself up towards the upper left of the screen. So it's roughly sitting just on the edge of that the Zono settings window, and yet I'm staring at them. My head is positioned for the middle of the screen. So to bring that back, I'm going to push my head up, and as I drop my head down now, you can see the cursor's dropped. It's still a bit to the left of where I'd like. So if I push off to the left a little and bring it back, I'm now much more centered. So I'm using the edges of the screen to reposition my cursor, and that's a key skill for anybody learning a head mouse. Grid 3 or no, I think that's a really good thing just to teach when you first start using it, just so that the user can control themselves. And I think that's really important. If you've got a slower speed on your mouse, you may well need to do that to reach across the screen. If you've got a very fast screen, and I've got a fairly fast screen at the moment, what you will find is it gets knocked off center quite easily. So you just need that. Yeah.
Sorry to stop you. Do you mind sharing your screen?
Yes, sure. Have I not been sharing my screen?
Not just the last minute.
You have been sharing your face to us.
At least you've seen the head mouse. I'll show you that in reality. Okay, I'm so sorry. So I won't make you look at yourselves. There's a black screen. Can everyone see that okay? Can you see that okay?
You can't see the screen. Yeah.
You can't see my screen. One moment. Let's try again.
There we go.
Something's happening.
Okay, great.
Good. So I'm sitting here, and my cursor this time is off to the right hand side of the screen, and yet, take it from me, I'm staring at the middle of the screen, or my head mouse should be roughly in the middle of the screen. So I'm just going to push my head to the right, off the edge of the screen a little, and when I come back, the cursor is better positioned in the middle of the screen. So I can use the edges to make it easier for me to get to the bottom, or if it's annoying, I have to work too hard to get up the screen, I can push down, and then it's much easier to get up to the top. Okay, so that's cool. I call that relative positioning. Use the edges of the screen to recenter your mouse. Okay, so I think without further ado, I think what we should do now is look at how you'd set this up best in Grid 3. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do two things. I'm going to show you it first of all with a click to activate, and then we'll use a dwell to activate. So I'm just coming to, I'm going to stay in Fast Talker, which is where I was. So this is a text-based grid set, and what you'll see at the moment is that as I'm looking around, cells are being highlighted as I move around. So nice visual display to tell me around, but I haven't got any selection method set up yet. Okay, so in order to set up my access effectively, we've done stage 1 in Quha Zono. We've got the speed and so on right, but now it's all about visual appearance and activation method. So I go up to the menu bar, sometimes call that the burger, and then settings, and this is where Neil was earlier, access, and as described earlier, we're focusing on pointer access at the moment. So at the moment, I've got the option to activate, which is set to click to activate. Now, the easiest way to do this is to plug a switch into my USB receiver. So give me a moment. I've got a little buddy button here. I'm just going to plug it in. Nice and straightforward. Now, what that then means is I'm really just using the switch as a mouse click, really straightforward mouse click. So now I can click on things. I'm just pressing my switch to perhaps clear that message and write something else.
Got.
And this could be, if someone's got good switch control, maybe under a foot, in a hand, that can be quite a nice quick way of doing it. And the other thing that's nice about this is if they are a grid user and they want to personalize their grids, by setting up it in this simple way, they can self-edit. So I can choose if I want to go up to the menu bar, go back into settings, and I'm not using the touch screen here. This is me as a head mouse user, pointer. So that's click to activate, and that's just using the switch plugged into the USB receiver. Notice on the right hand side that my highlighting style is here, so I've got color cell border, but I've got some other options here. You might prefer to color the whole cell, and then typically as I look around now, you'll see the whole cell colored. Back into settings. One to think about for someone who needs a bit more help with managing their accuracy on a cell might also be to use the Magnify Cell option. So if I come down to Magnify Cell and color background and just show you what that looks like. So now what we get is a much bigger area to move around in before a different cell is highlighted. So I'm allowed to do now a much bigger amount of movement to make my selection.
Got.
Okay. So I can clear. So that's really nice. It gives me more space to move around before I leave the cell. It means I have to travel a little further to leave the cell, but it gives me a bigger, Neil knows I always use this term, and it may not translate well, but I call it a jitter box. So it's the amount of time I can move my mouse and jitter around in my box without it leaving. So I can begin to say, hey Neil, and I've got a bit more room to make mistakes without making accidental selections.
Man.
Okay, so that's Magnify Cell, and that will work with a click. It will work with different activation methods as well. So back into pointer settings. A couple of other things to note here. You can have a reassuring click when you make a selection. I won't do that because you won't hear. I haven't set this up to show system sounds, but you just get a little sort of mouse click to say, yeah, you've made a selection, if that helps. Probably most useful with instead of click to activate, when we look at in a moment dwell to activate, that's when that comes into its own a bit more. The computer control stuff we'll look at in a second. So really that's the click to activate method, and that's how I would set it up. Now if you are using certain hardware, you may have switch ports on the device that you're plugging your QR into, and instead of plugging into the USB receiver itself, you can choose to use press switch to activate, and that would just require that you plug your switch into the switch ports of the device, typically perhaps a grid pad if it's from Smartbox, instead of plugging it into a USB receiver. For whatever reason, it may be that that's your preferred place to plug that switch port into. I suppose that if you were using the new GridPad 10S, which has wireless switch ports on the USB remote power button, that might be a nice reason to use that you can completely separate your switch from the device or the USB transmitter. So you have a choice. When I'm using Quha Zono, the easiest way to start is to use the click to activate, but you do have the option to use press switch to activate as well. Okay. Any questions at the moment? Does that all make sense so far?
I guess, sorry, if you are using our puff switches like Quha Cento or Quha Puffo, so you select the option click to activate, right?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And then exactly that. If you're using the Quha accessories, then you use click to activate, it would pick them up. Yeah. And remember those settings that I showed you earlier in the Quha Zono software, where you would control what those different switches were doing. So probably even more popular when we're using head mice in grid would be to set a dwell to activate. So I'm going to turn that on now. And in this instance, maybe what I'll do to begin with is I'm just going to restore the default. So I'm going to come back to a basic starting point. So I've turned off all the changes I've made. Then go back to dwell to activate. And this means that I can click without making a switch to select. So many of our users would not be able to control something like a switch to make a selection, but they would be able to hold their head still on a cell for a set length of time. So we can say I'm going to activate after, for example, 1.3 seconds, perhaps, and I'm going to give myself an indication of how long that dwell has to be. So I'm going to use a pi to do that, and I'm going to keep the highlighting of the color cell border, but I can choose to have no highlighting if I want to. So let's have a look and see how this works. So now I'm hovering over a cell, and I like the smoothness as I'm using the Quha. It doesn't feel too harsh. I can begin to combine this with some prediction to speed things along, and I can speak the message.
Hey man, how are you?
Now the important thing with the dwell is it can be, for the first time someone uses it, quite intimidating, quite scary, because everywhere you look, selections are beginning to be made. So teaching either the pause button with gestures, or more likely in grid, the rest cell, is really useful. So now, whilst I can move the cursor, no selections are being made. And as Neil described earlier, the only cell that's now active is the top right rest cell. So I can move around, I can scan my page, decide what it is I want to do, and when I'm ready, I can go back to the rest cell. I can carry on. Okay, and tell someone how great it is to see them.
Great.
Okay, so that's click to activate and dwell to activate. Then the other thing we need to think about, there's another setting here that's worth thinking about here, which is allow repeat activations on the same cell. So that can be helpful if someone's a good head mouse user and wants to put in double letters or click on the same cell several times in a row. So I'm going to write great meeting you. So I want a double E. So and then I want EE. So rather than having to come away and come back onto it, you saw there that it allowed me to make two selections on the same cell. Now the danger of that is that I fall asleep or I'm not concentrating, and you just get a string of letters. Whereas if I wanted somewhere just to pause, if you like, and you can see you can get some nonsense that's then appearing. So just be wary of that. It's a choice, it's an option that you can turn on or off. But the default would be off. So finally, we need to think about computer control. And I guess actually what I should also mention, because we don't talk about it enough, is if I'm a good user and I'm very familiar with my keyboard, it might be useful to go a little bit quicker on just my keyboard cells. So there's this option here called fast typing on letter keys. So if I turn that on, what you'll see now is that my standard buttons, the buttons around the edge, the things like the clear button, the delete letter, a standard 1.3 dwell that I've set up. But then if I go to here, I'm making selections without a visual marker much more quickly. And it feels, you know, if I'm a good user and I'm used to my keyboard, it feels nice actually. I don't have to wait as long. I know it's a prediction, but but when I go back to my standard non-letter cells, I still got that dwell time.
Hello there.
So that's fast typing. And as with eye gauge, that's a useful setting to think about if you've got someone who has got the potential to go quite quickly with their hand mouse, that's fast typing. So lastly, when we think about pointer settings, we need to think about computer control. So I'm going to go into computer control grid in this part of Fast Talker in a moment, and I can choose my selection method, and the default would be zoom to click, but there are some other options here as well. So we can have dwell to click, press switch to click. I'm going to start with the default and just show you how that works. Notice there are some how long do you want to zoom for and magnify for that can be changed. We'll just use the defaults for now. So I'm going to come up, I'm going to go into, just use my relative positioning to get my position a little better. There we go. Home, I'll go to the next page. And if I go to computer, so this is now a computer control keyboard. If I want to control all my computer, I've got the grid on the right hand side and I'm using dwell. And if I want to make a selection on, say, File Explorer, which is this button down here, before I do it, I need to make a selection. So I'm going to choose left click, there's my dwell. Now the next thing I look at or look towards will zoom in, and this is zoom to click. And it's just zooming, 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 and it clicks. And if I wanted to do a double click, I could go and fetch double click. And then I could choose to look at my downloads folder, for example, or the moment of truth. Never know what I've been looking at. There we go. And you can see I was struggling to technically set myself up this morning on this machine and install Teams, and I put on some Quha Zono software. But so that's the fundamentals of computer control. But if I was using, if I come back into home for a moment, if I was using a switch to click, then I could do it as before, where I've just got the switch plugged into my USB receiver. And if I then go to pointer, probably the easiest way to do this would then just to be to have do not click even, okay? But if I'm using click to activate, click on OK. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm now using my switch that I was using earlier, plugged into my USB dongle. So if I want to do stuff here now, I can ignore this if I want to, and I could just begin to manipulate things. I can drag and move things around, etc., etc. And if I was struggling with double clicks, I might do some window settings to make double clicking easier. But if I'm good with a switch, to be honest, this would be a great way to do that. Okay. Okay, I think I'll stop there. I'll stop sharing my screen.
All right. Thank you, Adam. Maybe at this point it would be good to check if we have any questions by email or via any other methods.
Or if anybody wants to ask a question now.
Yes.
Correct, of course.
Yes,
so
we have a.
shoot questions.
Yes, we do have a question about the gestures. So, is there no gesture for centering?
Yeah, there is. So the gesture for centering would be right, left, up, down. So yeah, it would be hold my head still and then right, left, up, down, and then that would automatically then center my my mouse cursor.
Correct, and the cursor is centered, and then it stays still for maybe a second or 2 seconds, so that you can sort of center or put your head into neutral position, so that then it kind of makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any other questions there?
No, but well, we have a comment on the settings. The settings are great because some people can move better left to right, up and down may be challenging. So it's great to be able to adjust horizontal and vertical separately.
And I think that you're absolutely right. That's fairly typical that if someone's going to struggle, they can often struggle, particularly with the up and down. That can be quite hard. So you would just increase the speed of the up and down so they don't have to move as far to get that same range of movement.
Right. Okay, maybe I think we have slightly exceeded our time slot for this webinar, but I think this is fine because it has been very interesting, at least.
It's what happens if you invite me to speak at a webinar, isn't it, Neil?
So we did not interrupt you because it was so interesting that we actually learned some new stuff ourselves even here. So at this point, thank you, Neil, thank you, Adam, for visiting our webinar, and maybe just a short introduction to our next webinar, which is going to take place in 2 weeks. So we are going to have Fiona Still from Zytec, and she is going to tell us about a new, or I don't know if it is new, but it's an interesting business model. So they are renting devices, and they can either continue renting the devices or they can then purchase the devices. So she will tell about how this business model works. And that's going to be very interesting. So if you want to hear about this and think whether it might suit your purposes, feel free to join us in 2 weeks. So thank you everyone for visiting our webinar today. And I don't think we have anything else.
Well, one thing, if any one of you have any proposals that what coffee with Quha webinars we should have during the spring 2022, so we would be very delighted to hear any of your ideas or thoughts.
We'd like to understand what is interesting to you.
Yes.
All right. So thank you everyone, and see you in 2 weeks in the next webinar.
Cheers.
Yep.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.